Hello and welcome to Deep in Pact, a deep dive into Wildbow's most unloved work 5 years on. That's Elliot Diebold.
And that was Reuben Morehouse.
And we are back to talk about Bonds 1.4. And this is a good chapter. I think it poses one of the most interesting philosophical questions of our time, Elliot, which is, after Blake has a shower, it gets very awkward with him and Rose, both being kind of half naked in the bathroom. So the question is it okay if your gender-swapped alternate self sees you naked? What do you think, Elliot?
See, I thought about this a little, and I've decided it's really no different than, like, having a twin who sees you naked, and at least in my neck of the woods, like, having two adult twins see each other naked is still a little bit weird.
Yep. All right.
So I'm going to go with
answered.
Yes.
Asked and answered. There you go. Don't even need the rest of the book, Wildbow.
Yeah, that was the issue Pact was exploring so far, and we've nailed it.
So
next issue.
Bonds 1.4 kind of picks up with Blake and Rose being a little bit deeper into the whole world, you know. They've started dipping their toes in and learning, basically.
Yeah, well, so it's sort of a bit of a time skip. It seems like Blake got to read a bit and then fell asleep for a few hours, and Rose kept on reading while he was doing that. But I really like this shower scene for a couple of reasons. But it was really, I think, the first time that the impracticality of this whole arrangement for Blake struck me. Like when he was trying to shave without a mirror and really wasn't able to sort of look at himself in the mirror. I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be a bit of a pain in the butt for him in some situations.
Yeah, I think we think a lot about about how since Blake has literally lost his reflection, he doesn't seem to be super introspective, which is great symbolism.
Yeah, well, he has a bit of an identity crisis during this whole thing where he's like, I don't have a reflection. This house is all unfamiliar and just reminds me of my grandma, who I hate. You know, my life is shattered. And then he just does, like, I've noticed a pattern already. He just sort of nopes out of bad thoughts and just starts thinking about something else. Like, he's having this identity crisis, and then suddenly he's like, hey, Rose, how did you get on with Molly and Paige? Like, he just completely segues conversations.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we kind of touched on this before, but he's very like non-confrontational within his own mind. He doesn't touch on the bad things. He avoids thinking about them.
Yeah, well, it ties into that personality trait that he's quite aware of in himself, where he doesn't like to sit still. And so it almost feels like when he feels himself getting bogged down by bad thoughts, he just runs off to the next thing.
Yeah, but jumping back to the post-shower scene, it's this... It does have them kind of be very exposed in front of each other, both, you know, physically and a bit mentally. And we get this... we get a bit more of exploration into the differences between Blake and Rose and Rose's relationship to their family. I like it because it really just kind of... It literally strips everything away and just puts them in front of each other.
Yeah, I also thought it was really good. I feel like the first half of this chapter is dedicated to kind of putting Blake and Miros at odds with each other a bit, like kind of reminding us that they're not, you know, this is a shitty situation they're in and they're not always going to agree. And like having them kind of exposed like that, and, you know, like, you know, Miros is kind of embarrassed and doesn't even want to look at Blake, and the whole thing really separates them more in your head, kind of.
I think it's important to point out we get a bit more hinting towards Rose being kind of more in competition with the family, as opposed to Blake, who was quite close to you know, Molly and Paige. So Blake is asking Rose about Molly's death and says, it doesn't upset you that she's dead? And Rose says, it does, but if you told me Mr. Niles, who was a neighbor of theirs, died, I'd be about as upset. Someone who was a small peripheral part of my life is now gone, you know? I like this both because it's, you know, demonstrating that Rose wasn't close to Molly, but also it's very kind of endearing. It's very much just like Rose really does just lay it all out there.
Yeah.
And even though she's a creepy, freaky ghost reflection girl, basically, it makes me trust her because she's just like, yeah, well, you know, I didn't like Molly. Like, that's fine.
I mean... Yeah, it's good. It's interesting, though, because it doesn't seem like that different relationship was only after the whole single granddaughter can inherit. Like, I think Rose actually specifically says that they weren't that close before that either. So I don't know if that was, the parents at play because the parents were already aware, or if that's just something more to that we're going to find out. But I also, there's a bit where Miro sort of talks about how Ellie basically threatened to kill her, and so she didn't drive her car anymore. And Blake's just sort of thinking, man, I could never give up driving my car. and it's like that practicality we brought up in the last episode as well. Like, she's talking about getting death threats, and he's just like, oh, but you need to be able to drive a car. It's it's very important.
Yeah, he just glosses over the actual bad part. Talking about Rose's relationship with her family, I wonder if maybe there's a bit of like, in a family that's antagonistic towards each other, if it's two girls, they have a lot of different avenues to like bully each other than if it's a girl and a guy. Like, Blake can kind of distance himself in a lot of ways that Rose couldn't, just because she's a girl and Ellie's a girl, and they can kind of bully each other in a number of more insidious ways there,
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I definitely think it's something we'll probably find out more about. Because, I mean, for me, I'm pretty sure it's news in this chapter, for me at least, that the whole single granddaughter inheriting it was a long time before Rose's death. I'd actually been working off the assumption that this was something Rose Sr. had declared, like, a couple of weeks before her death, not years, which is what this chapter seems to be implying. So that's sort of changing my whole understanding of the family dynamics a bit. And there's definitely more to learn there, I think.
Well, let's keep going then. Maybe we'll see what we get to. So we kind of get a bit of looping back as to what they've been doing since, the end of Bonds 1-3, talking about how they were reading through the books. And Rose asks where Blake's up to, and Blake says, oh, I just finished the introduction. And Rose is like, oh, I've just finished the book.
Yeah.
And, she cheats because she doesn't sleep or eat, and so she has more time to, like, spend reading, but Blake is still kind of jealous and upset about how Rose already is pulling ahead, and he doesn't really he wants him to be on equal footing because otherwise he feels like he'll be a bit left behind by her.
Yeah, and there's also, I mean, there's a bit of it. He brings up that, like, he's at least suspicious that Rose might be an other, and I don't think I fully understand what an other is yet, except that it just seems to be some kind of term for lots of different things that aren't mortal.
Yeah. So they mention not of mortals or of the mortals world.
Yeah, and so I don't know if that's sort of the whole blanket term or if there's more to it, but he does basically directly pull a quote from a book about others and talks about it within the context of Rose. And of course, Rose has just been talking about how she doesn't sleep, doesn't have a heartbeat, doesn't breathe. Yeah. So, we're pretty primed to kind of accept that sort of connection and understand why Blake isn't really trusting her as much as I am.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the other things I really like about this bit is we get a nice bit of world building about how there has been a kind of natural selection process for the others. All the ones who are like not as scary or a bit nicer have obviously just been killed by the scarier ones because that's how others survive and propagate.
Yeah, it definitely like hypes them up a bit more in terms of their danger level, because it's basically saying, well, yeah, there are crap ones, but they're not an issue anymore. Like, the only ones that are left are the ones that you got to worry about.
Yeah, it's a very authentic little bit of world building touch, which I think is very Wildbow. Extrapolating. Well, what is the realistic situation that would happen if there was ghosts and goblins and spookies and stuff?
It makes a lot of sense. It's great.
So Blake kind of shaves, he towels off, and Rose notices his tattoos. Small birds perched on tree branches in pale greys, whites, and yellows against a backdrop of reds in watercolor hues. Very colorful tattoos. I like them.
Yeah, and I'm assuming, like, I don't know if there's that much symbolism behind this. I'm assuming the birds are stuff to do with, like, freedom and movement, because that seems to be Blake's jam. The whole tree thing's giving me like a family tree kind of vibe, but that just might be the headspace I'm in because there's been a lot of talk of family in the book so far. So, that may not be the case. So that's just where my head is now.
Yeah. So Blake and Rose keep discussing the books, and Rose Rose tells Blake, "Hey, take a look at those headers." And Blake starts reading out all these horrible things: betrayal within the coven, betrayal by familiars, covens, crusades, death. Rose's like, no, skip ahead, and he just keeps skipping through all these horrifying dangers until eventually Rose is like, no, skip ahead, all the way to the end, and they're just like, no, it's just the witch hunters thing.
And it was great because he's just reading out the headings from chapter 8 of this one book, which is like lists of dangers a practitioner may face. So it's like, this is just a part of one book on all the shit he might have to deal with. And it's just like, man, shit.
Yeah. So we get a bit more world building about some of the people that live in the in this world, all these dangerous things, but as well there's witch hunters, and we find out a bit about that, and it's just kind of laying the seeds for more of the things about the world. And Rose kind of latches onto the witch hunters thing and sees it as a potential way to be in the world without being practitioners with a capital P, be in the world as witch hunters who are involved but don't kind of bond with others as much. And,
she says it as a loophole to, to sort of just do the minimum amount of magical stuff to meet Rose Senior's requirements, but then they can sort of package themselves up as witch hunters, which means they're not quite as vulnerable as most practitioners or something. So it's just a loophole to try and get out of the whole thing.
And I guess this argument between them kind of boils down to Rose wanting to follow the letter of the law, or of the letter, I guess, that Granny Rose has left for them, and try and find loopholes within that, while Blake is like, no, we have to kind of try and follow the spirit of this letter so that we can... Otherwise, there'll probably be traps and stuff along the way,
Yeah, well, a big part of his argument is kind of that he'll still have to properly awaken himself and make some of these sorts of payments, whatever that actually means, to do the witch hunter scenario. And his kind of thinking is, well, if I'm going to have to do this shit, I may as well do it properly. But I know, I found it a bit jarring, this kind of argument, because it seems like a complete reversal of the one in the last chapter, or maybe even the chapter before, where Blake found the note about the escape clause initially, and he wanted to escape, and Rose was the one who was like, no, that's a trap. So it's kind of like they've just totally swapped roles in the span of like 24 hours. It's interesting.
This argument especially is weird to me because they're dipping their toes in, but it definitely comes across that they don't really understand what practitioners are, or even what witch hunters are, or any of these kinds of things. Like, they have inklings, but it definitely feels like they're making these decisions, or trying to start making these decisions, without having the full information.
I mean, at this point, I'm willing to give Mirrose the benefit of the doubt and assume that she's just had a bit of a panic attack while she was awake by herself without her heartbeat, and so she's trying to make things as normal as possible. But it felt jarring to hear her and Blake completely switch roles on the whole getting out of this thing.
So they're arguing. And they kind of half resolve their argument, and it's half interrupted by a knocking at the door. And Blake is kind of like, oh shit, someone's at the door. And he goes and checks, and there are two policemen. And he has this nice line at seeing police, which is, relief hit me in a wave. Even in the moment, my heart sank. And it's just this great little bit of, cool, it's police. Oh shit, it's police. Which
and because this thing's kind of really the argument just before the police turn around turns into this thing, and it comes up again later, when Miro sort of brings up the massive power imbalance in their relationship. Blake is really the one who gets to do things, whereas they're tied together, and she's already starting to get a bit frustrated with the fact that he's really the one who gets to make all the calls, and it's going to be very easy for resentment to build up there, I think.
Yes, you have a you have a little note here saying it's very easy for resentment to build up there and be paid back when they swap, which I like. So you're doubling down on the fact that they're going to swap places at some point,
or at least have the chance to. But no, it's good for now. She has his back at least. Like, for now, she's like, let's deal with the police together, which was nice.
So one of the policemen, Laird Behame, is revealed to be the chief of police around here, and they kind of question him for a bit, obviously investigating the death of Molly.
Yeah.
And Blake kind of plays dumb because obviously he shouldn't really know that she's dead. And then they reveal that she was mauled to death in the woods, and he kind of he actually, even though he knew this already, he reacts to it quite emotionally.
Yeah, he's really worried that he's not going to be able to fake the emotions, and then they sort of confirm that she's dead, and he doesn't have to fake the emotions; like they just come. It's a touching moment. Yeah,
yeah. Blake is kind of apprehensive about this chief of police because he realizes that it's the policeman that he saw in his vision way back in the first chapter.
Yeah,
and so he gives him the old "Oh, not without a warrant" kind of line, which is nice. So Laird kind of dismisses the other policeman who it seems doesn't really know anything about this world that they're in. And then they kind of have this talk in cryptic language about like, oh, so can I trust you to be honest? Yeah, and I think you know why, and stuff like that. You know, it's very, how much do you know? Or how much do you know kind of thing.
And I mean, Blake does a good job throughout both the two sections of this conversation with the police officers, and sort of he has a go at lying by omission. Like, he sort of technically tells the truth about how he ended up in the house, even though, like, you know, he's leaving out some pretty important details.
Yeah.
And then again, when this Laird guy first sort of starts to invite him to walk together privately, Blake does a pretty good job of forcing him to be very specific about what he's offering and the protection he's offering, so that there's no loopholes, which was, you know, like, Blake's got a bit of a natural talent for this stuff, I guess, which is, you know, good to see.
I think I think it'd be easy to think about this kind of thing, of the interplay of nailing down specific words to make sure that there's no loopholes. I love that kind of stuff. It's just like very. It kind of gives me this like Sherlock Holmes or Poirot kind of vibe, where it's like, here's the world that you get to play in with all these rules. Like, oh, I'm going to guarantee you're safe. I'm guaranteeing I would trust my own daughters to the care of myself here. And this isn't a trick and stuff like that. And you kind of know there are going to be situations where things like this happen, but then they like double cross each other. And so it's like, you've got all the pieces of this mystery of, well, how are they going to circumvent and loophole these words? And then you get to figure it out later. It's fun.
I'm very excited to see how, all the semantics and wordplay comes into this book, because I think that's going to be really fun.
So Laird kind of invites Blake for a walk and talk, and explains, using this analogy of kind of geopolitical powers, basically the basic political system of the town. So there's the Behaims, these blonde women that he saw in his vision, the older Aboriginal woman, Johans, who has long hair and a dog familiar. Basically kind of points out each of the major players in the story and gives a little bit of backstory about them. And then explains that the Thorburns, that Blake's grandma, was sitting on a metaphorical nuclear weapon, and basically everyone wants to make sure that these weapons get decommissioned and don't fall into anybody's hands, right?
It's the Chekhov's nukes, I think, is a good analogy for these things. I have a feeling they're going to come back, and I reckon Blake will use them by the end of the story.
Ooh, we got another prediction brewing here.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to ask you this, because I don't feel comfortable answering this based on future knowledge. Do we know what the nuclear weapons are at this point?
No. Blake suggests in his internal monologue that he thinks it's the knowledge, like the books. In the house. I have a feeling it's going to be more than that. I have a feeling that the house is so strongly protected and stuff for a reason. I think maybe there's some stuff trapped inside it or something, but Blake seems to think it's just the knowledge in Rosa's books, but I doubt it's just that.
Yeah, okay. So Laird basically says, hey, we're going to keep you guys in place for now, as long as you're not too unstable, because we don't really know how to decommission these nukes. But when we figure it out, you know, we're going to just get rid of you, so sorry.
Well, he basically says he's in a very strong position, but if the Thorburns were to fall apart right now, there's a chance that this Johans guy would actually take control of the region, and they don't want that. So they basically tell Blake, listen, we're going to support you and be your ally up until the point where we think destroying you would be to our own advantage, and at that
Yeah.
point we'll kill you and like sorry.
Yeah. It's
And
probably worth pointing out that one of the other reasons that this is all kind of important, that the Blake's house is important, is their town is right on the verge of kind of an economic boom, and they see the Thorburn house as kind of standing in the way to that, as well as they want to make sure that the political powers are all kind of settled when there's an economic boom, so that there's not too much fighting to gain more power, basically.
Yeah, well, and it's implied that the Thorburns have been a thorn in everyone's side.
A Thornburn, yeah, totally. Yeah. So we kind of learn a bit more about the political systems. I think it's nice that we get Johan, who is... In the visions, he was the only one who was like, hey, come find me, I'll help you, basically, to Blake. Or even, like, tried to have a conversation with him. And he's set up as this very mysterious character, which I like.
I'm very interested to see more in him. See more of him, because like this whole thing by Laird is basically framed as you need to be scared of Johans right now because he's the one who benefits if you are upstage or killed right now. Yeah. And of course, Blake actually points out that the whole reason for this political metaphor is it kind of gives him freedom to lie. So I wonder if that is actually something we should trust, because Johan seemed to be the only one who was interested in teaming up with Blake, and I wonder if maybe that is I wonder if Johans is going to end up actually being the ideal ally for Blake. In the region,
he definitely does use this metaphor, which means that he can lie because it's just a metaphor. But it also does seem like Laird is being very straight shooting with him, like, hey, we'll be your ally kind of for now, but you'll be fucked in a few years, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Which kind of makes me think that it's like one of those things, the best kind of lie is one that makes you look bad. And so it's kind of like by, seemingly being so honest about killing him off in a few years, I wonder if it's distracting him from the bigger lie that's hidden within, which is that, someone like Johans is a good direction for him to go.
Yeah. So Laird basically drops this bomb on him and then says, hey, look, I'll buy you a coffee. It's not so bad. Let's go get a coffee.
Yeah. Yeah, and Blake says yes, which kind of is reminiscent of the bit where he agrees to just go on this walk and chat in the first place.
Yeah.
Is very much like, why are you saying yes to this?
It'll be fine, Elliot. You can trust Laird. He said so himself, and he can't lie, so it's probably fine. And that's the end of the chapter. They go off and head off to get a coffee.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I guess I just wanted to give some thoughts on the chapter, because I felt like this chapter was in two parts, really. Like, there was the whole thing exploring Blake and Rose's differences at the start, and then we kind of got into this riddle-filled exposition dump.
I like the way exposition is given in this, because there are two things, like the overarching thing that hangs in your head while you're reading all this is, well, he technically can't lie, but I know he's probably going to somehow. And so the whole time you're getting this exposition, you're like, well, could this bit be the lie? And it's very much like, it keeps the exposition dump more interesting just because there's this high likelihood that parts of it are a lie, or parts of it by definition have to be true, and you're not really sure which it is.
Yeah. Oh, and there's also, it's all just layered in this metaphor, which kind of means you, as a reader, you have to do a little bit extra to be like, wait, so America, so that's the Behaims, and Europe, that's the Born Women. And like, I went back after reading this one and went through the visions again and kind of mapped it all out in my head. Yeah. And it's interesting because that's something I'm assuming a lot of people would have done who are reading this serialized, like live as it was coming out. Whereas I think if I'd binged this, I probably just would have moved forward with my poor understanding of the metaphor and kind of hoped that the blanks will be filled in by Wildbow at the right times. Whereas because we're going through this so slowly, I've had the opportunity to go and sort of put the pieces together myself. So I'd be interested to sort of keep an eye out for whether I feel like Wildbow's filling in the blanks for normal idiots like me who would have just trudged
those
forward.
binge readers,
Yeah.
Well, I guess I won't comment on that, but we shall see, I suppose. On the whole, I like this chapter. It's obviously we touched on the fact that it is quite exposition heavy in the second half, but I found it more interesting than a regular exposition dump just because of this underlying tension throughout the whole thing, I guess. Like,
Yeah, well, and it was exactly what happened. Like last chapter as well did the same thing, where it was a lot of exposition, but it was hidden behind these sorts of riddles they had to use to get through the house. And this time, we've had the exposition kind of hidden behind a layer of, metaphors and confusion that you have to sort of piece together yourself.
Obviously, the start of this story introducing the readers, the audience, and Blake to a new basically a new universe, it has to have exposition in there, right? And so I find it a good mark of talent how interesting the exposition is able to be.
Yeah, definitely.
I guess that's Bonds 1-4 though, right?
Yeah, I think that's everything.
So this episode is going up just before the end of the year. Our next episode talking about Bonds 1-5 will be on the 4th of January. And then we'll really be right into the swing of this schedule, right? It's 4th of January, 7th of January, and we're really away at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think we'll be on that Tuesday, Saturday sort of format that the Wildbow readers will be more familiar with, yeah.
Yeah. So if you like this episode or have any other thoughts about Bonds 1-4 or 1-5 that you would like to share with us, please check out the discussion threads, which we will link in the down in the show notes down below.
Yep. We also have a website, mediamdpodcast.com, where you can, find all the info on this podcast and our other ones, including the titular Media MD.
Yep, and from there you can review the show on iTunes, which will be very helpful to help us kind of get out there a bit more. As well as check out links to our Twitter and Facebook if you want to interact with the show in other ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's that. We will see you on the 4th of January. Happy New Year, everybody. And, Bonds 1-5. See you then.